Nimble is a tabletop RPG by Evan Diaz published in 2025 after a successful crowdfund campaign. It sets out to aggressively streamline D&D 5th edition, all while retaining compatibility with the original game and its supplements. I've been tracking the development of this game for a while, and it's been interesting. Originally, Evan just wanted to make a zine that noted some rules changes to 5e, but the more he designed and playtested, the further away he got from just a few rules tweaks and closer to a full standalone RPG. Long story short here, Evan ended up with this, a beautifully rendered, mercifully easy to understand high fantasy RPG that is somehow both easy to learn and run as well as still compatible with 5e. In this video, I first want to take a detailed look at what comes in the physical box set for the game. Then I want to highlight some of the problems with 5e rules and how Nimble fixes them. In a way, this game is what D&D 5.5e could have been, or what D&D 6th edition could be but never will. Evan himself ran a session for me, and I also ran a few solo sessions for myself in order to unpack the flow of this game's mechanics. It was definitely enough for me to understand what this game has to offer. Finally, in this video, I want to go over some of the other ways that I think Evan is building Nimble as an enduring product that is focused on the user experience. He's employing best practices that I hope more publishers and game creators adapt. But let's get started with the physical product. This is the Deluxe box set, which I both backed with my own money and was sent a review copy of. It comes in a sturdy black box with smooth finish and some gold foiling on the front. The box overall is a pretty tough cardboard that I think would travel well. Inside there is a 3-panel one-shot called Meat for the Crab King, written by Jack Whale and Evan Diaz himself. Then there is a cloth map of a set of locations for a starter setting. It's actually pretty cool to be able to bust out a cloth map at the table. It feels like an in-game relic. The next item is the core rules book. The thinness of this book is really the most remarkable feature. I don't know if you've ever tried to design an RPG yourself, or if you've ever tried to tackle the 5e SRD to make a unique game of your own out of it, but keeping the page count down is actually harder than it seems. But we'll go over all the rules in this video. For now, I just want to show you the quality of the book construction. The cover is so thick and sturdy that I think that the cover itself is about as thick as the interior pages. The end papers have some good references, although with this core rulebook, I think the empty space could have been better utilized with more information. The interior pages are glossy and relatively heavy. The ink quality is excellent, but yeah, the most striking feature here is the fact that it's a heartily constructed hardbound book that runs only 60 pages. The next book in the box is the Heroes book, and to be fair, you need this book to actually play the game, so the game is actually another 80 pages. This book contains all of the 11 core classes that you build your character with. Although I only played this game reading and referencing the PDFs, I think if I played it using the physical books, I might have wanted the first 2 books to be consolidated into one. But there's something to be said for being able to have 2 small books open at the same time for more versatile referencing. I think this size of book is more common than ever actually with RPGs because it's just more practical at the table. The third and final book in the box is the Game Master's Guide. This one runs about 114 pages and has some more substantial information in the end papers. The GM book is composed of about 60 pages of really tightly edited GM resources and advice, and then a series of tutorial starter adventures followed by 8 unique locations. The next thing in the box is a GM screen. This one is ultra thick with a matte finish. It runs 5 panels and is relatively short in terms of standing height. I thought this was an interesting item to include in the box because if you look at the cardinal rule number 3 in the game's own GM guide, it says to roll out in the open. So maybe as the GM, you're supposed to hide your notes, but roll your dice in front of this screen, in which case a short standing height is actually perfect. Next we have some tarot-sized monster cards. These are great for throwing down at the table as well as for quick referencing. I wouldn't mind buying an entire deck of these cards, they're kind of perfect. I really like the larger size to showcase the art a little better and for getting all the stats at a glance. The other cards in the box are standard size. and include cards for tracking standard, inspired, and bane actions. There are multiple copies of each of these action cards so that you can accommodate maybe up to 6 players. Very handy for remembering which kinds of actions you have during combat. Then there are several dozen item cards, also handy, but probably needing an expansion deck or 2 further down the line, just because you can never have enough item cards if you're tracking them this way. And finally, a bunch of spell cards. The spell cards are great because honestly, the character sheet isn't nearly big enough to contain all of your spells if you play as a caster. It's pretty much never big enough in almost any RPG I've come across, and I can see why games these days are moving towards spell cards more and more. I ran a caster up through level 4 in Nimble and filled a couple of pages with spells. It's just too much to have to write down if you're playing with pencil and paper. But yeah, that's about it for the box set. It's a very complete physical package where everything feels overbuilt and high quality. I guess the only weak point in terms of durability are the cards. You might want to buy some card sleeves for those to protect them for the long haul. But the books and the box feel like they would last for decades. So let's get into how Nimble actually manages to evolve D&D 5e into a more playable, more enjoyable, high fantasy combat-centric role-playing game. The action economy revolution. Nimble eliminates the confusion of bonus actions and free movement by making every meaningful choice cost 1 or more of your 3 actions per turn. To balance the power of multiple attacks, Nimble implements cumulative disadvantage for additional attacks after the first, so players are encouraged to think beyond just spamming attacks on their turn. Ultimately, turns are faster and more intuitive because players no longer need to remember which abilities use which action types or worry about wasting unused bonus actions. New tactical options emerge naturally from the flexible action system, allowing creative combinations that rigid action economies would prohibit. Here's an example of what I mean. I leveled a multi-class Zephyr Mage up to levels 2 and 4 respectively. The Zephyr is just this game's monk, by the way, and a mage is a mage. Now, admittedly, you do get access to a lot of spells in the first 4 levels of the mage progression arc. I think the idea here was to make the game really interesting for casters at early levels. In combat, here's what options my character had at his disposal on his turn, including any of these spells and abilities as long as I had the mana for the spells on that turn. You'll notice in a lot of cases, a really strong spell will require 2 actions, such as any spell above cantrip. Essentially, you're always facing 2 baseline limitations on your turn, a limit of 3 actions per turn, and a rush penalty that discourages you from making more than 1 attack per turn. But within all of these spells and abilities, the combinations in this case were really intriguing and straightforward. Here are 5 of the most apparent and useful combinations I could think of. And that's just 5 possible combinations out of literally thousands, all for a mid-level Zephyr Mage PC. No bonus actions, no special actions, just actions. Mixing and matching them is very easy and potentially very rewarding. It should also be noted that certain class abilities confer extra actions on one's self and other party members, so the strategies can become even more interesting when you start planning those extra actions. Armor that actually makes sense. In D&D 5e, armor functioning as chance of missing creates a weird narrative disconnect where plate mail, for example, somehow makes you harder to hit rather than harder to hurt. High AC values make fights swingy and unsatisfying as attacks either connect for full damage or miss entirely with no middle ground. This binary system doesn't feel like armor is actually protecting you. Instead, it feels like you're becoming untouchable, which breaks immersion when a sword misses someone in full plate. In Nimble, your armor reduces incoming damage from an attack when you use the defense reaction, which costs 1 action when it's not your turn. And unarmored characters use their dex modifier as their armor rating when making defense reactions, representing agility and evasion. This works better and makes more sense. Ultimately, more hits will connect because armor doesn't make you harder to hit. Armor feels genuinely protective rather than evasive, as it reduces harm instead of making attacks mysteriously miss armored targets. The system creates meaningful weapon and spell choices against different armor types, as some attacks ignore armor entirely while others are heavily reduced, and that adds some tactical depth to equipment selection. Spellcasting without the hassle. Vancian casting in D&D 5e feels artificial to new players who expect magic to work more like mana in video games rather than the complex spell slot system inherited from older editions. Complex slot progression tables require constant reference as players struggle to remember how many slots of each level they have at different character levels. The distinction between spell preparation and known spells adds another layer of complexity that ranges from confusing to just plain tedious. Nimble uses a mana points system. Mages, for example, use a straightforward formula of intelligence times 3 plus their level to determine their total mana pool. For shepherds, the max mana pool is calculated as will times 3 plus level. Characters learn thematically based spells as they level up, with a clear progression of unlocked lists rather than an overwhelming spell shopping experience. And upcasting is made easy. Players can spend additional mana beyond a spell's base cost to enhance its effects, with clear scaling rules for each spell. No spell preparation bookkeeping eliminates the daily ritual of choosing which spells to prepare, which lets players focus on gameplay and strategy. And mana regenerates on safe rests, which are GM-controlled story beats rather than automatic time-based recovery, and that gives better narrative pacing to magical resources. Classes streamlined. In Nimble, there are 4 stats: strength, dexterity, intelligence, and will. This eliminates redundancy and dump stats because each attribute serves a distinct mechanical function. Level 1 character creation teaches core mechanics gradually rather than overwhelming new players, with complexity building naturally as characters advance and players become more comfortable with the system. The 11 classes feature clear complexity ratings from 1 diamond to 3 diamonds, allowing players to choose their desired level of mechanical involvement up front. For example, the cheat is 1 diamond and has straightforward mechanics focused on critical hits and stealth. Then there's the mage with 3 diamonds, which has a comprehensive list of spells and a relatively involved character progression centered around those spells. GM experience transformed. D&D 5e's challenge rating system creates confusion as challenge rating numbers often don't match actual encounter difficulty, leading to unexpectedly deadly or trivially easy fights. Complex monster stat blocks overwhelm GMs with dozens of abilities, special actions, and special rules that slow down combat and require constant reference. Encounter building becomes pure guesswork as the relationship between CR, party level, and actual difficulty remains opaque and unreliable. In Nimble, the encounter math is simple. Creating balanced encounters becomes trivial when monster levels simply equal hero levels. 6 level 2 heroes fight monsters totaling level 12. That's it, done. GMs can also create balanced custom monsters very quickly using clear stat tables that scale appropriately with challenge level. And there are simple armor rules where medium armor means enemies only take damage from the dice rolled and they ignore any modifiers. And heavy armor on an enemy means half dice damage, also ignoring any modifiers. The only exception to these being if a player rolls a crit or exploits an enemy's damage vulnerabilities. Most of the mage's spells don't have modifiers, so that fact means that armor is actually weak against a mage's spells, generally speaking. It's also worth noting that there are 3 adventures included at the end of the GM guide which actually teach you the game from the ground up. You start at level 1 and it walks you through an entire session. Note that this one-shot as presented all fits on a 2-page spread, which is a bit of elegance that is harder to pull off than it looks. Then the next adventure is for level 2 characters and sort of holds a new GM's hand in introducing a more exploratory scenario to players. This one spans 3 pages total. And the final adventure is for level 3 players, and it spans 5 pages. I just don't think I've ever seen a series of tiered tutorial adventures like I have in this GM's guide. Combat that flows. D&D 5e's complex initiative tracking requires constant reference to determine turn order and slows down combat flow as players forget when they act, and death saves obviously create dramatic tension but often slow down play as dying characters spend multiple turns making saving throws instead of participating meaningfully in combat. And honestly, legendary actions in 5e feel tacked on as an afterthought, creating awkward timing issues and requiring constant GM attention to remember when and how to use them. And condition bloat overwhelms players with 15 or more different status effects, many with overlapping or confusing interactions that require frequent rules lookups. In Nimble, initiative is determined by players rolling a d20 and adding their initiative bonus. A single digit on that first roll grants 1 action to start, 2 digits grants 2 actions, and a 20 or more grants all 3 actions on that first turn. And generally speaking, the PCs will go first unless they were ambushed or something. As far as wounds and death, characters can survive 6 wounds before death with no death saves required. When their HP hits 0, they enter the dying state, but they don't go unconscious or anything. Instead, they are reduced to 1 action per turn, and anytime they take further damage, they take 2 to 3 wounds. But the key is that they can still do things in combat, and will shed their dying state the minute they receive even a single hit point of healing. This all creates high stakes while keeping dying characters engaged in the action. As far as legendary actions, that's solved by having legendary monsters act after each hero's turn. This design automatically scales with party size and creates dynamic back and forth combat without all that legendary action timing. Also, check out this legendary creature's stat block. This is the entirety of the stat block. There are usually 3 or 4 unique actions, and most importantly, a bloodied ability that is triggered when they reach half their HP, and a last stand ability or feature that is triggered when further HP loss occurs. The bloodied and last stand abilities in particular serve to punctuate the combat in dramatic and memorable ways. As far as conditions, Nimble consolidates status effects into essential, clearly defined conditions that players can understand and remember without constant reference. Nimble's designer, Evan Diaz, was nice enough to run a session for me. I was especially interested in seeing how combat actually ran and flowed in the game. Here were my biggest takeaways from playing the game with the creator. Combat feels like DnD. I think this is the most important thing for a lot of people, and I was a little surprised by it. Our combats felt exactly like playing the latest version of Dungeons & Dragons, except everything was going a lot faster. And if you're wondering about how easily the game can actually convert content from D&D 5e, check out this conversion guide. Everything is completely and utterly compatible. Evan told me that he has seen groups where some players ran characters in Nimble but used their 5e character sheet, and other instances where 5e campaigns switched to the Nimble rule set mid-campaign and there were no issues. Every spell is important. The spell lists in Nimble are a lot shorter than they are in 5e, but that's because all the BS spells have been eliminated, and all the good spells have been consolidated into tight lists to hit and damage rolls all at once. I didn't mention this when discussing combat, but the way attack rolls actually work in this game is that you roll whichever dice your attack calls for, and then take the leftmost dice as your primary. So, for example, if I were casting Arc Lightning, that's a spell that deals 3d8 damage. I wouldn't roll separately to see if I hit. I would simply roll 3d8, and whichever die is the leftmost die on my table or VTT, or the first listed die result in a text-only dice feed, that's the die that would determine if I hit or not. Basically, as long as that die isn't a 1, then it's a hit. And if it's a hit, then I add up all the dice and possibly add modifiers for damage. It's all just one roll. The only exception is if my primary die rolled the maximum, in which case I'd roll it again and again as long as it hits maximum, adding to the total damage for that attack. This consolidated roll feature is probably the most important feature of the game in speeding things up and simplifying stat blocks, all while keeping things fair, interesting, and still somehow 5e compatible. Safe rests do a lot of work. In Nimble, there's a new kind of rest. You still have short rests and long rests, but the only way to shed wounds is to have a so-called safe rest, which is at default about a week of protected rest. Safe rests end up doing a couple things. First, they prevent players from being cheesy and abusing the long rest mechanic, and second, they coerce players into slowing down the rate of combats and engaging more with NPCs in town and with the story in general. Beyond the game, I found the game's rules to be remarkable, but here's where Nimble really sets itself apart from the pack, and honestly, this is the stuff that gets me most excited about what they're doing over there. Everything in this game is open source. There's not even an SRD. Nimble's third-party creator license is about as generous as it gets. You get access to reference text from all 3 core rulebooks for your original products, no approval process, no legal hoops or gotchas. Creators get the complete rules system, full class features, spells, monster stat blocks, the works. The restrictions are minimal and sensible. Don't copy huge chunks of text verbatim without adding value, and don't use the proprietary artwork or logos except for the official Nimble compatibility logo. The creator has also mentioned plans to host the rules for free online so people can test it out or access it at a glance. There's even a free Creators Kit PDF that explains the design thinking behind the game. The game's first-party support is already incredible. Since the core books wrapped up, new content is rolling out constantly. New classes like the Hexbinder, Artificer, and Scion, new monster groups, a whole new spell school called Terramancy, and a string of adventures. You can get all of this stuff through Evan's Patreon or on the official web store. But also check out what the community has already built. Nimbrew.net for creating homebrew content, the Tabletop Town app that's becoming like a D&D Beyond for Nimble, Lissum for character creation with role comparison tools, a free community magazine called Nim Plus that releases every other month, actual play shows, and a Foundry module that's in soft launch at the time of this recording. They're also running design jams with prizes for community submissions. In total, I think this is the kind of forward-thinking, pro-consumer approach that I hope more creators and publishers adopt. Nimble might not be for everyone, but it knows exactly what it's trying to be. It's a high-powered 5e-like fantasy RPG that wants you to start fast and strong and have deep but accessible tactics during combat. On the flip side, if you want only brand-name Wizards of the Coast products and mechanics, you can always stick with what you know. But here's the thing. At this price point, Nimble is basically a no-risk purchase. It's not even a purchase. You can read the rules for free, try it out, see if it fits your table better than 5e does, and if it does, you can buy the PDF and the books. I've left all the links below. Let me know in the comments if you've tried Nimble at your table. I'd love to hear your experience. Thanks for watching. I'll see ya.